Well, John just mentioned goal number 12 of the Social Development Goals of the United Nations, which deal with sustainable consumption. And that's a favorite topic of mine to do that. And so I put some piece of EU legislation for today and to ask, does that really contribute to sustainable consumption, or is it with regard to sustainability just nonsense? And my answer will be it is such case of nonsense. That's a short overview. What I will do during the next 10 or 12 minutes, just to ask, what does EU air passengers' rights regulation mean? Not everyone in Europe, of course, everyone who deals with travel law knows about this regulation, but not possibly outside. Then the second question is this air passengers' rights regulation sustainable? I will deal with compensation it's providing for. And the answer will be no. And the question is, should we put aside this regulation, or are there any possibilities to make it more sustainable? And the answer is also very skeptical. And then we'll have a look to other means of law to reach more sustainability within air traveling. And there we find, might have heard about the Green Deal of the EU Commission, and there we find something I would like to introduce to you. What is this air passengers' rights regulation about? It provides for compensation in the event of cancellations of flights and delays. Not very surprising, it does so. And the basic rule is that you get some money in case of cancellation and delay. And poor people may be happy to have a delay because then they can earn some money. And it means that you get that compensation without suffering any material damages yourself. In the case you have some material damages, for instance, when you book a hotel at your destination and you have to pay for the hotel, though you couldn't need it through this cancellation, this is regulated by the Montreal Convention. There we have an article that you are compensated and you get this money additionally. And the question is, why do I get such an additional compensation when I book an air travel and I do not get that with other consumer contracts? For instance, when I buy furniture and it is delivered late, of course I do not get any additional money. That's the question, does that make sense? And then the quite interesting development of this regulation is that in its origin from 2004, there was nothing about compensation in cases of cancellation. It was the court of the European Court of Justice in his famous Sturgeon case who introduced, by applying the rules on cancellations by analogy, that you get this very same money also in cases of delays. By the way, our President Emeritus Michael Vukoschitz was one of the lawyers who brought that famous Sturgeon case to Luxembourg, to the ECJ, and so he may be guilty that we have all these rules made by the court in Luxembourg. But there is one exemption when an airline does not have to pay such compensation, and these are the very famous extraordinary circumstances which could not have been avoided. And in that case, the air carrier does not have to make any compensation. And now the question is, what do extraordinary circumstances mean? And there's a lot of case law from Luxembourg every month, or every, let's say, half a dozen cases per year. We certainly have who only deal with extraordinary circumstances. I do not want to go to the details, but it's very famous that national courts ask the court in Luxembourg for a further decision because there are no clear general terms what extraordinary circumstances mean. that's just to give people who are not familiar with this regulation a very short impression what these mean. We also have problems with the European Court of Justice dealt with. These are connecting flights. For instance, when you book a flight from, let us say, from Frankfurt or Berlin to Sao Paulo, and then you have a connecting flight to some place in Brazil, and the first flight is okay, and the second flight is delayed. Is this delay in the internal flight? Does it mean that the carrier of the first flight has to pay in cases like that? There's a lot of case law in so far. And today we have the problem of cancellations related to the corona pandemic. And there are no cases, of course, time is too short that the European Court of Justice could deal with that, but I'm sure we will have cases of that. And then we have the problem that we have low-cost airlines in Europe. The most famous of them is located in Dublin. And they don't used to pay when they should pay. And when you want to get your money, you have to sue them in court. And German courts are full of cases insofar. Or you have to call an arbitration board. There are different arbitration boards within the member states. But neither the court nor the arbitration boards really work that people get their money. Instead of that, we have private enterprises, legal service providers, a lot of them, meanwhile in Europe, to whom you may, who claim for you, and then of course they have their commission fee, 30% of the sum they can get from Ryanair or someone else, and then everyone is happy. And the interesting matter is that these legal service providers are a matter for artificial intelligence, because it's very easy to prove the delay. You know where the passenger, who the passenger is, and you know how much the sum is he possibly has to claim for. And now the question is, does this kind of compensation has any sense in making this regulation sustainable? Is it really an incentive for the airline to take more care to be on time and to avoid delays and cancellation? And if they would do that, they would need larger time buffers on the airports in case they are delayed, that the delay is not will not be on the next flight. And to make it short, I do not really think this is a goal for sustainable air transport policy, to make some people more happy and to let wait aircrafts on the airport. This is not an efficient, in the sense of an efficiency of sustainability within in the air industry. Then you can ask if the airline, you might ask if the compensation has to be in the flight prices. The prices might be higher and more expensive, and this might discourage consumers to book flights. And this is an advantage for sustainability, because to avoid flights is a contribution to sustainability. Don't know whether that's really true, but you could perhaps argue in such a sense. But when you look to reality, you see low-cost airlines do not pass compensation through their prices. They just do not pay. And they wait whether you might go to court or to one of these artificial intelligence service provider. And so my interim answer is this air passengers' rights regulation does not support any idea of sustainability of flights within the world, and insofar we can forget it. But now the change is, do we have other means? And then I already said we have the EU Green Deal of the von der Leyen EU Commission. And they substantiated the mobility sector by a sustainable and smart mobility strategy, which is now nearly 1 year old. And that's quite interesting to look in this strategy, because it's easy for everyone with European languages. I think there must be a Portuguese version of that on the websites of the EU Commission, that you can read what may come. And they say in this, they identify two problems for consumers, for travelers. And this is one is that the airline might become insolvent, and then the consumers, according to existing European law, is not compensated. And the other problem is that tickets are not refunded in the event of cancellation. And of course, the corona contributed much to these problems. The EU Commission was aware of that and is dealing with that. And as they say, they were examining possible alternatives for the protection of passengers. And we are waiting for years that there might happen something with insolvency protection from airlines. We had in Germany the disaster with Air Berlin, and there were other ones, and might be there will be a solution of these problems. But also this has nothing to do with sustainability. But the next point, as you know, in Europe we have still a network of railways which partly are good and partly could be better, let us say this way. But the Commission in this paper refers very often to railways, and they say we need an intermodal framework for passengers' rights. This is to say same rights for airlines and for air passengers and railway passengers. Might be we will get insolvency protection for airlines, which we have in package tours already. We have inadequate enforcement, but all these things do not have really to do with sustainability-oriented components. And so my interim conclusion is there is no progress towards sustainability, even if the air passengers regulation will be developed further, which can be expected. But there are more suggestions in the smart mobility strategy of the EU. They want to reach a zero-emission technologies for aviation, zero for large aircrafts by 2035. And they focus very much, they say it's not so easy to develop modern technology for aircrafts very quickly. And for the meantime, we need renewable and low carbon fuels. They call it a Refuel EU Aviation Initiative. And they want to improve the existing EU emission trading system. They say it's too cheap to get these certificates, and they must be more expensive for airlines. That's one line they have in mind. Then the link with railway to avoid flight short distance flights, and this is to say flights within the EU. They want to, much money is spent for developing the European high-speed rail network. Should not be exempted from taxation any longer, as it is. And in particular, and very important, multimodal passenger transport services should be facilitated so that you have one ticket, let's say, to get a section of your travel by rail and the next one by airline, and some other issues. I do not want to go to details now. And then, because I'm a private lawyer, I asked what can private law do to support these general goals of change of a mobility strategy. And I just want to mention, this is also part of this paper of the EU. They say we need information about the ecological footprint. They say we need information on available transport alternatives. This is when you book a flight on a short distance within Europe, then you have on your board mandatory also the information about an alternative railway transportation, and then you may decide which one to book. And I'm sure you know about compensation voluntarily to ecological footprints that should be improved, that you can see when you book a flight to compensate your footprint. You can pay and we have a link to someone to whom you might pay to plant some more trees. And I think this is interesting for a lawyer. We can substantiate these suggestions by pre-contractual information duties. We have in Europe, within the field of consumer law, a lot of pre-contractual information duties, and they could be included in the new passengers' right regulations. And then violating these rules could be a violation of the EU Unfair Commercial Practices Directive. And there are also in Europe, that's a general meaning very good means to enforce this Unfair Commercial Practices Directive by claims of associations. And well, that would be an advantage to enforce such, to inform about the ecological footprint, etc., by means of private law. The disadvantage is it's a big discussion since many years. Does information really help consumers? And there we have the term of information overload, well known in our discussions, and you have to balance these. Is it worth to have these informations, or does the consumer just ignore it when booking? He said, well, to click another button to get to the final thing, and not to come to the booking what he really wanted. My result is there are some good steps in this new paper of the EU Commission as an alternative to the, in my way, a little bit old-fashioned and not really to the problems of our today passengers' rights regulations. In my view, this regulation does not have a sustainable future and should at last amended by other means of law, which not really exist. Thank you.